A Man's Life by Raina Alidjani. I was surprised when an elderly woman opened the door. I'd been to 10 of these railway houses already, and this was my first time seeing a woman. For words, she asked, without even the trace of a smile. I wondered how many of us had turned up here so far. Tin cans get kicked down the lane. The phrase almost hitched in my dry throat. Each time I said it, I was further from home, but perhaps closer to salvation, whatever that meant. She nodded and shut the door in my face. I stood on the porch, feeling exposed by the singular light above the doorway that illuminated the partially rotted wraparound porch. This place had the air of a once majestic southern mansion, but its only saving grace these days was its massive size. If it were in Manhattan, it would go for millions. In this one gas pump town, it was likely close to worthless. I dug my hands into my pockets, fingering my wallet, the last remnant of my life. The longer they kept me waiting in the open, the higher my chances of being seen. It wasn't safe for a man to seem out of place anymore. I imagined the neighbor's eyes looking through shuttered windows, ready to call the hotline on me. Don't worry, you're in Texas now. I sighed with relief as a barrel-chested man entered the doorway. His hair was brown and wiry. A chewed toothpick sat between his spaced teeth. This man was not the type I would have ever associated with before. He'd hold no power or influence in the social circles I longed to climb. But these days, this type of man was the only type I felt safe with. He moved aside, a sign for me to enter. I'm Noah, I offered, but he held up a hand to cut me off. Best for you that I not know much about you and you not know much about me. I nodded. He looks like a fancy one. The woman's drawl was more potent than his. Ma, let's mind our own business. With the word fancy, longing stirred inside me. Then the all too familiar anger rose like bile in my throat. I moved to Harlem right after undergrad and worked as a waiter until I finally found a way into advertising. Going from a nobody to a bona fide Don Draper had been the work of a lifetime, multiple decades. Now it was all gone. I was at work when they came for me. The fear had been lingering in the back of my head since the ruling, but I rationalized that it couldn't be more than a shell, created to placate the feminist man-haters that had somehow proliferated Washington. Surely, I thought, even they couldn't be serious. Our HR rep called me into her office. I had a stupid smile on my face on the way in. She was my friend, or so I thought. When we'd done a layoff the week before, we'd gone for drinks to commiserate. She was young and so shy. I underestimated her, told her things about me, and I even thought that we might end up. I shouldn't even say it. You can't say things like that these days. She wouldn't look me in the eye when the enforcers in their long blue coats showed up in her office. After being escorted out, I went straight to my buddy Jason's place. He was a high-profile football player living in a penthouse overlooking the park. He'd been visited by the enforcers before and didn't seem to be alarmed. I hoped he could give me some pointers or at least some reassurance. They took him, his fiancée was crying as she picked up the pieces of their home strewn about the apartment. He'd obviously put up quite a fight. It must be that bitch's fault. Why didn't they just let her have that abortion? Jesus, I raked a hand through my perfectly coiffed waves. The local news was on. The broadcaster's usual cheery demeanor, which comforted me every morning, had changed. She seemed triumphant, like some great wrong had finally been righted, and she was high on revenge. My stomach turned as I realized that even she wasn't on my side. Hundreds of men across the viewing area have been detained tonight. Reports say thousands more may be at risk of such measures as the deadline to comply with last month's Supreme Court ruling in the case of Duval versus Soros comes to a close. The landmark case criminalizes men for not taking on an active parenting role with children that they fathered. Men without custody rights can face involuntary castration and possibly prison sentences if they don't comply. Supporters say this move encourages family values and is enforceable whether or not the child's mother requests these actions. I pay each month, I shook my head. Aside from the cash, they don't want me in their lives. They don't fucking care about the kids. These hairy armpit losers just want to punish men for not being able to get their abortions anymore. She shattered a crystal vase against the wall. I lost my job. I was close to tears. You're next. Her toned tan legs were shaking. Their wedding was supposed to be in a few weeks. She had been working out and plumping herself with fillers, and it showed. Too bad it was all for naught if Jason didn't return. And even if he did, what would their financial situation even be like? The NFL wouldn't have him back after a scandal. They'd likely never get the chance to start a family of their own if the worst of what they were saying was true. She gulped and let out a big sigh before rummaging through a stack of papers on the kitchen island. Here, she said, handing me a business card. What's this? I turned it over in my hand. There was no name on it or telephone number, just an address. On the back, written by hand, was the phrase, tin cans get kicked down the lane. No clue. She shook her head and crossed her arms over her ample bosom. Some guy told Jason to go here, say that phrase before they came for him. He thought it was bullshit. Might be bullshit. Might be a way out. That was how my journey on the railway began, and I'd been wearing the same tailored suit since. The elderly woman sat down and started crocheting on a lime green, or was once lime green couch. An old television set was on in front of her. Can we watch the news? I asked. I can tell you that it's only getting worse out there. It's a witch hunt. Women, and even other men, acquaintances, family members, coworkers, ratting out these fathers. When the government starts to mess with a man's manhood, well, he let out a grunt. The end times are near. The man walked as he talked, and I followed down the narrow corridor. Down here tonight. Tomorrow you'll cross. He opened the door to a set of stairs leading to a basement. I gulped. This was how scary movies started. My hesitation was sensed from below. It's okay. We're down here too, a voice called. I'll fetch you in the morning. The man handed me a bottle of water and a protein bar before leaving me to descend the stairs cautiously. There was a middle-aged man and a boy down there sitting on milk crates. The walls were shelved and stocked with cans. At least we won't go hungry if we get docked down here, I thought. 3 sleeping bags were on the cement floor. A bucket was in the corner. The duo looked at me expectantly. So what are you in for? I chuckled. The older man offered a smile in return, but the younger boy, who was 15 at most, stared at the ground. I'm Hank. This is my son Marcus. The man motioned to the boy. They looked nothing alike. The boy was long and pimply, and the man round and scruffy. I'm Noah. I took a seat on the empty crate. I'm a creative director. You may have seen some of my ads, wrote the Super Bowl commercial for McDonald's this year. They stared at me blankly, but I didn't care. I'm a natural-born talker, and the words that had been bottled up over the past week poured out of me. I'll admit I was a bit of a playboy in my 20s. Tinder made it so easy. I had fun. It was New York City, and we were young. There were girls. One got pregnant and had an abortion. It was easy peasy. I hated condoms for violent things. Anyway, another got pregnant not long after. And wouldn't you know, a damn ban goes into effect right then. I pay for support monthly, and they've moved to California. Especially when advertising is a New York game, how can I split the parental responsibility? Last I heard, the kid was doing great without me. So how's that something to be punished for? I looked down and was surprised to see my cuticles picked raw. Had I been doing that? When I finally looked up, I was relieved to see the sympathy in Hank's eyes. I've always been liked. Some would say loved. Since the incident in the HR office, I felt hated for the first time. You don't think they want a father? The kid Marcus asked. His voice sounded defeated, desperate. I shrugged. Who was I to know what the kid wanted? I couldn't even recall his birthday. So you obviously have a father, I began for him, hoping that pushing him to tell their story would change the subject. It's not me we're fleeing for. It's Marcus. The boy looked like he might cry. He was raped when he was 12 by his cousin who was 16. This law is nasty. It would take his innocence from him all over again and any chance at a normal future. I wished I had a glass of whiskey. I put my head in my hands. Well, shit. I'm going to sleep. Marcus curled his long limbs into the sleeping bag and closed his eyes. Same. It's been quite the week. I laid on my side, eating my bar and my sack to avoid the further interaction with the depressing duo. Without Ambien, I couldn't sleep much. I tossed my phone so I couldn't be tracked, so I didn't even have my brown noise podcast. The cold floor didn't help things at all. Despite that, I felt energized when morning came. It was the day of the crossing finally. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I had hoped that I would beat living on floors and basements or being castrated. This law will get overturned sooner rather than later, buddy, I told Marcus as we loaded ourselves into the back of the van. I'll be back in my rent control department overlooking Bryant Park, and you'll be wherever you come from. I think all kids want a father, was his response as he sat as far away from me as he could. Maybe so, kid, but there's more to a man's life than that. I was asleep when the vehicle came to an abrupt halt. Sleep can be funny like that. When I'm lying down, willing it never comes. Sitting up in a car, my head can loll forward and I can pass right out unwillingly. Open up, a voice yelled from the other side. I took in a deep breath. Marcus and Hank looked at me since I was closest to the door. As I suspected, when I swung the doors of the van open, enforcers were standing in their long navy robes. Like in advertising, it was sink or swim, and I decided to swim. I knew, or at least hoped I knew, that they didn't carry guns. A Reddit post had called them nothing more than entitled vigilantes. I barreled through the 3 of them easily enough. I worked out with a trainer 4 days a week and recently ran a half marathon. It was simple, really. I sprinted in the direction we were driving down a barren road. I didn't stop until I realized I could no longer see them. Marcus and Hank were likely enough to keep them busy. a necessary sacrifice. A pickup truck rolled by at some point, minutes or hours later. It was the first sign of life I'd seen. I threw my thumb up, saying a silent prayer that the driver was not a serial killer and would not pass me by. The truck rolled to a stop, and I hoisted myself in. Where am I? I asked before introductions. My manners had gone to shit. You're in Mexico. The end.